Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll make a start. Welcome to today's webinar, From Net Zero to Combustion Transition to Embracing Our Biosphere, Learning to Thrive Sustainably. Today, we are really pleased to be joined by Professor Simon Spooner, an environmental scientist applying scientific models combined with social, economic, political, and regulatory methods to address the challenges that we face and help build better infrastructure systems. As always, there's going to be the chance for questions at the end of Simon's presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation, and these will then be asked on your behalf later on. This webinar is also being recorded and will be made available on the IES YouTube channel. Thank you very much for logging in, and Simon, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is some ideas which have been developing over the last few years. So basically what I want to look at is where we are with net zero. Is that really serving us right? And then introduce a different sort of approach to this, which is combustion transition. It's an idea I've been developing. But then also look at how we go beyond that as well, into really thinking about what properly sustainable development is and what is our place within the whole biosphere and approach to what we need to do. And then we need to look at how do we change to achieve that. And then I will describe in more detail we might call becombustion transition framework. So this is when we get into the nuts and bolts of metrics and calculations and how you plot better pathways to a transition. It will sort of jump around a little bit backwards and forwards, but I hope that the themes will come out and will start to make sense as we go through. So first of all, what I would say is, the world's burning, and yet what we're talking about, carbon, greenhouse gases, climate change, they're very important, but ultimately these are the symptoms and not really the cause of the problem. And this also goes for net zero. It's a good concept. It gets sort of public participation, people understanding what the issues are. And getting everybody sort of all together and working towards a goal. The problem with it is it's not actually a very good counting system. You're trying to count carbon in an open system. It's very, very hard to define the boundaries, both what it is you're considering, the time periods you're considering it, what aspects, which parts of the economy you're looking at, how they interact, the time residences of things in the atmosphere, how far up and down the supply chain to include, the materials or the actions, all sorts of things. It's also quite hard to assign responsibility for any given total set of carbon emissions because they all come from so many different people and different things. And ultimately, it's very hard to answer a simple question: where are we on our journey to net zero? How far along are we? Where do we stand? We actually don't know. And when we get to net zero, will we even know? Can we even work it out and know that's where we are? So with some of these problems, I was thinking, what other approaches could be taken? Is there a better way? So to introduce what I think might be a better way, so you've got to identify the causes of the problem, maybe develop better metrics just than carbon accounting, and then that's fine, but you've got to get past the old so what problem. You've got to be able to use this to build a better strategy, better policies, and to mobilize investment and see how that can then develop new understanding and sort of change the behaviors, attitudes, and change the way that things are done, to see whether this can work. So to introduce combustion transition, at its core is a very simple observation, which might seem counterintuitive at first, but it is that fire only comes from life. Before there were living things on planet Earth, as far as we know, there was no fire. Now, the sun is not fire. That's just hot plasma. Volcanoes aren't fire. They're just hot stuff. Even lightning isn't actually fire. Fire is this chemical process that comes from a disequilibrium between the atmosphere and reduced carbon on the Earth. And that is created by living things. It was created, it first happened about 500 million years ago, maybe took 1 billion years of simple plant life to create that atmosphere. First dried out moss on a rock, hit by lightning, catches fire in an oxygen atmosphere. So that's a sort of a fundamental relationship between living things and fire and combustion. And the fossil fuels in the ground, the gas in the atmosphere, these are a treasure that has been left to us by past life. And our ecological limit, it appears, is the capacity of the atmosphere to absorb the greenhouse gases which arise from burning things. And you might really observe that in just the last few decades, we've consumed maybe 100 million years of what other beings have created and left for us. And we're tearing through that treasure. So it's a different way of looking things. But then what does that mean as a way forward? So we've got to transition from using combustion to power our industry and our lives to what I would call bypassing the biosphere, using non-combustion systems, not using fossil fuels, wood. These are all biosphere products that we use for energy and materials. We have to bypass that, stop using those and use other systems. We also, very importantly, have to transition from displacing and impoverishing natural systems to embracing and enhancing our biosphere. So instead of clearing away and destroying things, we need to sort of embrace the world around us. We also need to develop metrics that can help us to plan this. So just to go through this a bit more, this relationship between the biosphere and us, and I'm sort of using this term a bit. So the basic idea is we used to live as part of the biosphere, part of the ecosystem, but we learned how to consume it, how to burn and to clear, and then on to engineer and enhance. So agriculture is the first sort of great engineering enterprise enhancing our biosphere as far as we're concerned, and that has gone on and on as we get more and more energetic and sophisticated. We also learn how to find and to concentrate the treasure that's left by past biospheres. So what we have left in the earth is not just fossil fuels, which come from past living things, sort of coal from trees and or oil from other animals and plants, but also some of the minerals, iron ore, some of the other metallic ores, limestone, we make cement, which these are the remains of living things. They are events in the past brought on by the changes in the biosphere that led to the deposit and concentration of these materials. We've learned to control combustion, giving us heat, power, mobility, and products to build cities. And the result was a population explosion. So we are now numerous and we are also wealthy. In the last 200 years, we have moved from most of us living in abject poverty with a tiny elite to now most people living in comparative wealth. It's even off, maybe poverty is increasing a little bit now, but this huge increase in poverty, in wealth and numbers, and the ability to sustain larger cities. Consequences of this: pollution and impoverishment of the living world, and much damage. But with it, on the plus side, we have acquired a great deal of knowledge and we have built infrastructure. And that knowledge persists, and even, and that knowledge, that infrastructure is shared with those who maybe weren't so involved in the development of some of these systems, but can now benefit from it, as well as having to suffer the consequences of the pollution and the damage. So I want to come back a bit to this concept about how do we stop consuming the biosphere? How do we instead embrace, enhance, and ultimately we need to bypass to get our energy. So this is sort of the first phase, is the bypassing of the biosphere for our energy systems. And this means taking the energy of the sun. Yeah, I've taken a slightly fun picture of the sun there, which we'll all remember. But that is what gives most of our energy, solar energy, whether it's as tidal and wind or solar, or how we get that, or geothermal, but also nuclear energy is there. And these are not going through the biosphere, they're bypassing it, and that gives us our infrastructure and our energy. The other side of that is the embracing of the biosphere. How do we how do we work with the natural world? And this is not just a few nature-based solutions. This needs to move to how do we really act as stewards on diverse multi-species communities, not monocultures and exploitative farming as we have been doing, but working much more in harmony with a complex system, curating those systems, bringing together lots of species, diverse systems, and getting those symbiotic gains. So that's quite a sort of big learning process we have to go through. Part of that, it's not just all going back to nature. We can also enhance those biosphere systems by putting energy in. That energy that we've got from bypassing the biosphere, we can put into the biosphere, put it back in, and then get more out. The classic example of this is, for people in the water industry, is an activated sludge plant. That is an ecological system which we put huge amounts of energy into. We put it in a structure, we add energy, and we get massively more ecosystem services from it. That's very, very effective. We can do the same things within agriculture, with greenhouses and indoor agriculture, and with fermentation processes, where we get far more out from such systems. So to look at where we need to be sort of going, we need to rebuild those life processes, the ones that create the disequilibrium, that actually is the source of fire itself. We need to change our land use to allow that to regenerate. So maybe having some small, higher intensity, higher energy agriculture, enclosed systems, and then much more extensive, diverse and open systems of management. So we need to change our relationships between how we manage land and public goods to meet different human and non-human needs. We need to give that space to nature, allow it to heal, build up the diversity, and involve a lot of different, it means being more embracing of different stakeholders, different people. It's a more complicated way of managing our land, which we need to do to get that sort of regeneration and go back on some of the damage that we have done. So I now want to go a little bit more into the sort of combustion transition framework, the main ideas about that lead to how you come up with something that's applicable. So the core in this is that it's our addiction to using combustion, which drives our economy. This is the cause of climate change. Greenhouse gases, they're a symptom of using combustion. So combustion itself is responsible for about 80% of greenhouse gas emissions, the other 20% being land use. 93% of our total energy use is direct or indirect combustion of fossil fuels or biomass. So indirect is where we turn it into electricity first and then use it. Only a few percent is actually directly from solar or nuclear at present. Now, it's in the combustion chamber that fossil fuel is realized for its economic value. So all this focus on stopping fossil fuels, they're not actually the problem. They don't matter. Fossil fuels have no value until you burn them. Well, they're quite a useful resource, but that's a minor use for them. So it's in the combustion chamber that they're given their value. And that combustion chamber is a component of infrastructure that provides services which are of value to individuals and society. It's the services that are valued, not even the combustion, but that using combustion to get those services is the cause of climate change and greenhouse gas and those problems. Now, each combustion chamber is a closed system. You can count what goes in and you can count what goes out quite easily. And that system is owned by somebody, always. They don't sit there on their own. Somebody's benefiting from them, and you can assign responsibility at that point and know what's gone in. So there are the possibility to transition those systems to non-combustion, mostly electrical ones, and still have the same quality of life. And once our infrastructure and combustion processes are non-combustion, then the problem is largely solved. So just to sort of recap that, combustion gives us wealth, power, comfort, but it has disadvantages: noise, air pollution, resource depletion, social inequality. And there are alternatives to it. We can be using electricity, we can mitigate combustion, or we can also just not consume as much. We can find ways to avoid having to use it where we can. So what we need to address are those millions of small combustion chambers. They are actually the big problem, not the few big power plants that we have that we get very obsessed with, and the big industry. They're quite a small proportion of it. The biggest areas are all the stuff that's embedded within buildings and transport and other systems. Not only that, but power stations are some of our most efficient combustion systems. A gas CCGT gas steam power station is extremely efficient, converting about 60% of the energy into electricity. So we need to look at how we can address each different sector. And with that, also looking at that efficiency, you can look at how it is in other sectors. So electric vehicles, for example, use about 1/3 as much energy in all as a internal combustion engine. A heat pump is 1/2 to 1/5 as much energy as a gas boiler. So there are ways, as we transition to electrical systems, that we can become much more efficient. However, efficiency is not an end in itself. Efficiency makes that transition easier. And a post-combustion civilization, now once we make this thing, it will be very high energy, and it can still have high economic growth. Materials will not be, materials rather than energy will be that limit to growth. And that is why we need to move towards more circular economy principles, but those are high energy. And combustion is also embedded into the materials of our infrastructure, much the same concept like embedded carbon. You also have embedded combustion. And when you make those materials zero combustion with renewable energy, and the materials coming through the circular economy rather than extracted from the biosphere, then they can actually become abundant and sustainable to us in economic terms. So this combustion transition methodology, it's about transition, not just getting to the end goal. We need to focus on the value that is being delivered by the services and getting that by another means. Non-combustion systems, generally higher cost, so we need to have the financial vehicles to bridge the gap, and we need to phase out combustion back from the point of final use, and we need to maintain resilience and backup. So it's not just all in one go. We need to look at what's efficient to remove and prioritize. So to do that prioritization, you need to understand the scale of the problem, and you need to be able to focus your tools on the best places. And to do this, I've developed a couple of metrics which can help to be the alternatives to net zero. Sorry, excuse me. So the first of these is what I call the non-combustion metric. This is just a measure of how far away we are from our goal of being non-combustion. And the second is a more quantitative analysis of each combustion process. And this is a sort of combustion accounting approach. And what I'll do is I'll introduce these in a bit more detail, starting with the non-combustion metric. And let me just, sorry, I don't know why I don't know whether this is covering the titles for you as well, but I hope not. I hope not. Okay, so the non-combustion metric. This, to explain, this is looking at the UK's total energy use by source, so oil, coal, natural gas. Electricity, 21% of the total energy we consume comes as electricity. That actual electricity itself is consumed in industry, residence, commercial sort of areas. So that's distributed across the different sectors. What we can do is to look at the total amount of energy and the percentage of energy which is used in each sector. So if we now look at it in terawatt hours of energy that's used for industry, transport, residential, we can break these down. If you look at then how much of that in each sector is electric, you can then calculate the percentage of electric. Very simple to do, but this basically is your non-combustion metric. Now, how much of the energy that we're using in a particular area is not combustion, not fossil fuels, not biomass, but is electrical at the point of use. So it's at the point of demand. We're not going all the way back down the supply chain here. So you can work out that this is for 2019 in the UK, 21% of our energy was final use non-combustion. Of that, electricity that's used, 43.5% was from non-combustion itself. So that means the rest was combustion. So your compound of those, 9.2%. So that will be the UK's 2019 non-combustion metric, 9.2%. Obviously, our goal is to be at 100%. So we're not using combustion. We're not causing all the problems that we cause. How could we get that? So as a planning tool, you can then use this to say, well, we could set some goals for each sector. And these vary. Some sectors are quite easy to electrify, others are more difficult. And some can change a lot in a short period of time, others less so. So I think, transport has the potential to change massively as we go to electric vehicles. Currently, tiny amount of electrical use there, but it could be quite significant. A lot of industry is electric already, so it's less of a transition. Commercial and public, that includes water supply and utilities, which are largely electrical already. But residential, that has a long way that we could go in terms of bringing up that to non-combustion. So if we were to move to 85%, 60% of each sector to non-combustion by 2030, we already have a goal to be 85% renewable and nuclear by then. And that will give us a non-combustion metric of 51%. So that's what you would achieve with that sort of strategy. So the next one I was wanting to talk about was this combustion accounting, so the more quantitative approach. So to introduce that, what I have is this combustion accounting metric. The idea of this is you're focusing on the combustion chamber, looking at that as you're seeing how much energy is going into it, what percentage of that is converted into work done, your efficiency of your combustion chamber effectively. You can then weight that by the carbon intensity or greenhouse gas intensity, ideally by the air pollution impact as well, because it's the combustion also ties together the air pollution impacts. And then you can also put that into the context of the value that you're creating in terms of wealth, the net present value, or other economic measures of value. You can also consider the resource depletion that's resulting from your fuel use and use natural capital accounting for that. So then you can express these metrics in these terms of like the amount of energy, generally in kilowatt hours, gigawatt hours, something like that, megajoules, and the percentage of efficiency there. And then you can weight in various ways by the greenhouse gas, the air pollution, the resource depletion, the value, etc. So I'll try and give some examples of applying that. So this is taking the UK's energy use from sort of diagrams we saw earlier, from the IEA. And we're looking on the outside here. This is the total energy use we have. It's not all of the sectors. The numbers don't add up as they were in the above table because some of the sectors have been missed off to keep this sort of manageable and simple. These are the important ones. And then for our non-combustion measure, you can see total energy use, terawatt hours a year, and the percentage which is non-combustion. So that's our non-combustion metric there. You can then also add in our combustion accounting metric, that efficiency. Now, this is the efficiency with which the sort of average efficiency in that sector of the combustion process. So in residential at the moment, mostly gas boilers, 70 to about 90% efficient there. In transport, this is much, much lower. Internal combustion engines are very, very inefficient. Best you're getting 25% of the energy that you put in turned into useful work. Often it's much lower. So you can sort of start to scale this up and see where it goes. But what matters then is seeing, well, what is our transition strategy? What can we do? How do we apply those sectoral goals that I was putting earlier of where we are now, and where we want to move our sector to? So particularly focus on sort of the residential and the transport sectors. So we could go from 80% in the residential sector to maybe 250 or 300%. If we use heat pumps, they have very high, more than 100% efficiency. In transport, maybe you can go from 20% to 90% or so. As you move to EVs, you can get up to a higher level of efficiency. What this also shows is how this results in a reduction in our total energy use. So we're down from 1400 to sort of 900 or so, but a big increase in our electrical demand. And you can start to see how that will go. And in this, we're only changing a percentage of those sectors. So you can just sort of see how a route will changing. To try and get this in a bit more detail, I'll take some examples from the key sectors, from the power supply sector, from the transport, and from buildings, to try and go through these numbers and understand sort of what this relates to when you consider the total energy, and then you put that into these conversion factors, and what does it tell you about your transition strategy? So we're going to look at going from the example of a coal CCGT plant being exchanged to renewable energy. I'll take solar as an example. Could be wind, could be anything. The examples of cars going to electric cars and gas boilers going to heat pumps. I've got a picture there of just a simple air source heat pump. In reality, there would have to be a lot more involved, and that's not a simple transition, but that's another entire lecture series to go into the challenges of that. So we'll take as our unit a 100 megawatt gas power station and the energy that can supply. So looking at that, what we have got, a 100 megawatt station, about 75% utilization, that produces about 660 gigawatts of electricity a year. That actually is our unit that we're going to compare the three different cases against. Of that, because that's what you want as your useful energy. You've had to consume sort of 1100 or so kilowatt hours of gas, and that has emitted 197 kilotons of CO2 equivalents using all the sort of standard conversions. There's lots of factors, but I won't go into the tedium of these calculations now. But you can work from there. You can say, well, 660 gigawatts of power, instead of changing a power station on the supply chain, what if I approached that unit of power and worked on the demand side? Well, you could change 132,000 combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles, assuming a vehicle's used 20,000 kilometers a year. We're going for the people who use their vehicles quite a lot. We assume it's about 20% efficient, and an EV is about 80%, accounting for various losses. You would save 858 kilotons of carbon. So you're saving a lot more carbon with that switch than you are with just the power station. And for building transition, A typical residential house in the UK uses about 12,000 kilowatt hours of gas. 200,000 or so of these use your 660 gigawatt hours of power as your unit. If you were to go to heat pumps at 300% efficiency, so I say not just air source are a bit lower than that, but some ground, some heat network source, you'll be saving around 445 kilotons of CO2. So it's seeing that the scale of change. And if you look at these three things in comparison, you can see that in terms of greenhouse gas savings, the gains from the demand side changes are much greater than on the supply side. You can also look at the value of these. This is sort of the cost in value. I did a bit of NPV analysis. So that power station would cost about, well, power station only cost about 30 million pounds, but the solar panels to replace it would be around 300 million or so. But they have a very positive NPV. So you've got quite a high NPV on that, especially if you have to account for all of the carbon costs of the gas power station. Likewise with vehicles, changing to electric vehicles, you have a very high NPV. That many additional vehicles will be about £1 billion of additional cost over having bought combustion engine ones. But because the lower fuel costs, you have nearly 3 times higher return for that. On the building heating, for heat pumps, the value argument of that's actually pretty marginal, possibly negative. The fuel costs of heat pumps end up pretty similar to those of the gas one on a purely comparison basis, but it is a big saving in emissions. So this at least helps you to focus, what is the best place, which is why changing vehicles is the best returns. Buildings also very good. The returns on changing your supply side are much less. And in fact, were you to leave your gas power stations there and power the vehicles and the buildings using a gas power station to produce the electricity, you're still massively better off than if you just dumped the power station and didn't change the demand side. So it's clearly illustrating that change of emphasis. So getting towards summing up now, just sum up those metrics. Key points are that this non-combustion metric gives a simple and clear picture of the progress, where we are now to where we want to be and what the stages are, which is very hard to get with net zero. Focusing on combustion efficiency and combustion accounting and looking at that, it's very good for prioritizing which sectors, systems to go for. You can understand the trade-offs between total energy use, electrical demand, electrical supply increase requirements, and good for doing that kind of forward strategic planning and investment prioritization. The combustion accounting metric, that gives us comparative, quantitative comparison of different options, and you can look at the balance between total energy, electric, greenhouse gas emissions, and also the values and the costs which relate to each of those. So finally, to summarize, net zero, it is a good start, it's a good concept, but there are a lot of rabbit holes to fall down there when you start to do the calculations. So, can we come up with something which is a little bit better than that? A bit ambitious as a goal, but we'll give it a try. So we need to understand both our consumption of resources, which has come up through our industrialization, what's given us this very comfortable lifestyle, really, and much better situation than the past. But it's not just fossil fuels and burning things, it's also the way that we are consuming land and displacing living systems. These are two sides of the same coin, and we have to be recreating that biodiversity, rebuilding those living systems, changing the whole way that we manage land, as well as changing our industrial processes. And introducing this sort of rather philosophical concept about the connection through fire and the life processes that give rise to fire, it's a bit sort of might seem a bit airy-fairy. It's not something that can be argued with. It's not something we normally think, but it is definitely the case. But that then leads to building up how to connect the two sides of the industry and also the land use, because we've got to get past this whole so what. Yeah, nice idea about fire, but how does that change what we're doing? And so that is why, say, focus on the combustion. You can then develop these metrics. They give insight into our situation, and they help us to plan those transition paths. I've given some demonstrations, some examples of these. Still a bit wavy. I mean, we could do a lot more in terms of improving these. But the other side of that is they can help you to develop economic instruments, which will help to finance the investment and the requirements. We've got to completely change our infrastructure. Huge investments are required, but they are economically positive. There are gains in this, and we need to develop the economic tools for helping that. That is another topic, combustion transition funds, which I don't have time for, but we can look into that another day. And we've got that link with the combustion metrics. Ultimately, it will be good to develop something which can also quantify the regenerative capacity, to really understand that net combustion, in a bit like net zero, but trying to keep things a little bit simpler and from a different perspective. So there's a long way to go in developing this, but I think there is the basis of something that can be built on. And really, the hope is that this sort of approach can lead us not just to net zero, which is sort of somewhat reductive, but to a system where we can really thrive sustainably, really embracing a biosystem around us, working with the other animals and plants and creatures we share this planet with, and to come up with a truly sustainable system. So that was really what I wanted to present, and I hope there's a little bit of time for some questions there.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that really thought-provoking presentation. I will now open up for questions from attendees. Just to kick us off, so do you envision, if this combustion transition was kind of taken forward, where do you think the responsibility would lie for making some of these changes? Because obviously, if you're shifting the focus away from the supply side to the demand side, who do you think should be leading on the responsibility for the changes?
Well, yeah, it correctly puts the responsibility where it should be, which is with everybody. We are all responsible for this. There is not some bad man the other side of the world who's doing this to us. We are all doing it to ourselves and have been for a long time. Of course, that doesn't give a focus. What it means is that sort of government policy and also investment vehicles need to focus on making these changes. And some of the biggest difference in the message here, I think, is that the narrative needs to move away a little bit away from the supply side and renewable energy onto the demand side. Because the reality is that when you make the change on the demand side and the demand for electricity increases, it will be supplied. That's how the economy works. That will come, and we've got the regulations to steer it towards the renewable and nuclear. But that will drive it. We can't just building supply will not make the demand side change. So that's what it needs to be. And in each sector of the economy, you need to develop policies to drive the manufacturers, the users at each different level towards changing towards non-combustion systems. As I say, there is a whole approach of combustion transition funds for trying to do that, but there isn't time today to go into the details.
Great, thank you. So how do the significant changes in energy prices that we've seen recently have an effect on the calculation?
Yeah, of course, depending on which day of the month you decide to pluck your number from the graph, you could get very different answers. I have sort of drawn some broad lines. I've tried to take some estimates of the energy costs and wholesale costs and other factors there, and a sort of taken a view on what they're likely to be over the next year, which will almost certainly be wrong. But I think that doesn't change the scale of what the message is there. And of course, these rising energy costs do just make, they're a positive thing, because they focus their mind. They make these transitions more urgent.
Thank you. Good, nice feedback in the Q&A box, saying it's been a really insightful presentation, and asking what influence has this within the UK government at present in terms of driving infrastructure investment priorities?
I can't read and talk at the same time, can I? Well, I think it's in terms of infrastructure investment priorities, I think it clarifies, obviously on the supply side, nuclear and renewables, sensible ways to go. But it also means we need to be investing a lot more on how we transition our building energy, particularly. I think this is, we talk about it, but we are going nowhere, really. Insulate, well, most buildings in the UK are not suited to very high levels of insulation. They're old buildings, they have to breathe in particular ways. You wrap them up in polystyrene or something, they will rot. And so we need to be able to get that energy in that we need to heat the building and to maintain the building fabric, because the buildings are designed to have heat within them and they rot if you don't have it. But a simple air source pump isn't going to do that. So we need to be really thinking about how we can come up with better and coordinated building heating solutions. I think that's the highest priority that we need to focus on. Obviously, insulation helps, but it's not the ultimate solution there. We also need to be thinking a lot more about our land use strategy, moving towards regenerative farming and more diverse nature-based solutions, getting people more involved in the land around them, having our planning system so that we're more sort of embedded within the biosphere, within our natural surroundings, coming out of these sort of walled cities. So I think those are the two key priorities. It's actually changing the way in the buildings that we live and where we live and how we interact with the land around us.
Great, thank you. And do you think that combustion accounting should replace the carbon accounting that organisations are doing? And if so, how do you think we could get organisations on board to do so?
I'm not going to go on there's one side of it that goes, oh yes, of course, but in reality, no. They each have their place. I think this is something which is additive to the carbon accounting. As I say, carbon accounting gives you a very good overall view. It's particularly good for the sort of the big picture international, where are we, because the carbon all goes into one atmosphere. What it's not so good on is at the sort of microeconomic level. How do I change this system I've got here? What's the best strategy for my building portfolio? Because of the rabbit holes, it seems like that's a good thing to do, but all of us who've tried to do these sort of things find it gets incredibly complicated very quickly. Whereas the combustion approach can be a lot quicker and simpler and easier to see. It's just that you have to sort of get your head around the fact that once you've sorted out the combustion, you have sorted out the carbon. You don't need to do every nth calculation on it. And on the bulk areas of it, as I demonstrated, a very simple coefficient applied to the combustion component gives you most of the picture of what's going on with regard to your carbon. And in terms of the embodied carbon elements, you can also look at that in the same way as embodied combustion. If you change the way in which you're manufacturing those products, then you remove a lot of those problems from it. That is very hard to do. That's the hard to abate area, but it's how we can look at it.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in terms of questions today, but really appreciate you coming and presenting. We've had some great feedback, including an attendee keen to get in touch with you about another presentation, so I will pass on those details after this. So thank you very much to all of you watching today as well. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. I hope you found that beneficial and informative. And if you are an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance on the IES CPD tool. As I mentioned, this webinar recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, so please do subscribe to that, because then you'll get notifications of when new recordings are put up there. And our next webinar will be on the 21st of February, and will be on SME's twin transition to sustainability and digital transformation. Again, this is free to attend, so please do visit the IES website to register. Thank you very much, Simon, and thanks to all of you for watching. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.